if you're a college basketball fan like myself, chances are you've watched a game or two or three or 50 on ESPN, and you've heard the voice of my guest in this episode, Mr. Mark Adams. He's been an ESPN analyst since 1999 and had the opportunity to work with him during my tenure at the Missouri Valley Conference. During our conversation, Mark and I discussed his coaching career, how he got into broadcasting. We revisit the last decade of Valley basketball that we both saw with our own eyes up close and in person. We talked about the current landscape of college basketball and so much more. It really was a fantastic discussion. If you've heard Mark on TV or if you follow him on Twitter, you know that he is not shy about sharing his opinions. And he even shared with me some stories that he doesn't often discuss in public. So without further ado, here's Mark Adams on Persons of Interest. But Mark Adams, college basketball analyst, Coach Mark Adams, how are you doing, sir?
You know, Derek, we've got a long and good friendship over the years, and we connected through really my favorite conference in college basketball, the Missouri Valley Conference, but you did tremendous work there. And we've seen some history together. So this is another day of college basketball history, but it's just great to reconnect with you.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that's definitely one thing I want to talk to you about is that period of time when I was there from 2010 to 2018, 2017. Just a crazy period of time for the Valley to see some Final Four teams, to see so much history made. But before we even get into that, one thing I always love doing is sharing folks' background, because I started doing this podcast because I think what people don't realize is that no matter what folks do for a living or how they got there, they always have a story. And it's been pretty inspiring to me to hear how people who we do significant and special things do it, by working hard to get there, by, earning and just doing it the right way. And I didn't even know this because you don't even talk about it a whole lot yourself, of your college basketball coaching background, but also what you do now. Some of your other opportunities you do with Enthusiasms, your own adventure about leadership and teamwork and communication, what you do in the sort of other landscape outside of sports. But I'm just sort of curious. First, going back to the coaching career, how did you know you wanted to be a coach when you went down that road?
Derek, every once in a while in your life, there are seminal moments when you just get this feeling that I belong here. And my father coached Pee Wee football back in the 1960s, and I actually played for him. I was part of his first undefeated team in 1968. In fact, I have that picture, the original picture from 1968, that team picture. I actually have it hanging in my house today. My father passed away. That was willed to me, and I have that. And shortly after that time, I was in high school, and my dad encouraged me to help him coach football at that time, and I did. And so I'm a sophomore in high school, basically, maybe even a freshman, and got a chance to coach with my dad, who, by the way, went 6 consecutive years in Pee Wee football, which meant 7th graders, basically, without losing a game. He won 60 consecutive games, and my team in 68 was his first undefeated team. We went 10-0 that year. And I had a feeling then that this was where I belonged. Now, that was football, but my real passion was basketball. And so, things come full circle, Derek, and I'll go to the present, and then let's go back to the past.
Okay.
And today, I coach 3rd graders in basketball and love it. Love every second of it. I coach 15U baseball and love every second of it. And the reason I bring that up is because I started off coaching 5th and 6th grade basketball when I was a junior and senior in high school and had some success at it. And that's really what drove my passion. There was just nothing else that gave me that feeling of belonging on the floor that I had as a basketball coach. And I've grown to literally have a love affair with basketball throughout my life, from the time I was a little boy until today, and I'm certainly not a little boy now at 63 years old, but we're talking about over 55 years of passion. And that's really how it all started. And then just very briefly, I knew I wanted to be a college basketball coach. My dad asked me one day, my nickname's Bucky, and he said, "Bucky, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Dad, I want to be a college basketball coach." And he looked at me, and my dad never said, "Boy, that's going to be tough," or "You can't do that." He just told me, he goes, "You can do it." And as I went down that path, I graduated from the University of Cincinnati. And Derek, not many people know this story, but I wrote to 125 schools. Now, there were no computers, okay? There was, anything like that. And we literally wrote 125 letters. I wrote them, and then my father's secretary sent them out for me because she had actually the technology to, to put in addresses and stuff. And long story short, I got 124 rejections, but one of them didn't say no. Didn't say yes, but didn't say no. And that was from Lynn Archibald, the head basketball coach at Idaho State, who said that he did not have a graduate assistantship at this time, but he would keep me in mind. So I flew to Pocatello unannounced. In April of 1979, I had never been west of Indiana. And I flew to Pocatello, Idaho, and I showed up on his doorstep. And I stayed there for however long it was going to take. And I just wore him out. And eventually, he gave me a graduate assistantship at Idaho State. And that's how I started my coaching career.
How about that? Had no idea. You've never shared that story with me before, so that's interesting. So, a Vandal, Idaho State Vandals, right? Is that the same school I'm thinking of?
Boy, did you just commit the cardinal sin?
Uh-oh.
It's the Bengals of Idaho State and the Vandals of Idaho.
Oh, boy. I deserve the grief. I deserve all the grief. I thought I was good with my mascots, but apparently not. Apparently, the farther west I go, I have them all blurred, so...
That's okay. Another little factoid about Idaho State. So Marvin Lewis, you might remember Marvin Lewis was, an assistant coach with the Washington Redskins, was with the Baltimore Ravens, and then also the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals. And he was my classmate at Idaho State.
How about that? Look at that.
Yeah.
Play 8 degrees of Mark Adams here. Round up all the folks that may be connected to you. So that's great. So determination. You break it down and say, I really want this opportunity. And you stick with it, and you get the graduate position. And I'm curious. So how long did you coach? Was it 15 years or so? How long did you coach college basketball?
I coached for 17 years, and what was really cool about it is that sometimes things that you say actually come true. And we've already talked about the fact I want to be a college basketball coach, and I did that for 17 years. At Idaho State, there was a point where a radio announcer by the name of Jim Fox, he asked me, I think it was my second or third year at Idaho State with Lynn Archibald. He asked me a question on the radio, said, "Well, what's next for you?" And I told him, I said, Jim, I think I'd like to be a small college head coach at a place like Rocky Mountain College. Literally said that. Now, Rocky Mountain College was in Billings, Montana. We had played them at Idaho State, and it just came out. Well, lo and behold, in 82, I'm 25 years old. I interviewed for the head coaching job at Rocky Mountain College and got the job.
Oh,
I became the head coach at Rocky Mountain College. They had gone through 17 consecutive losing seasons. And our third year there, we went to the national tournament in Kansas City, the first time since 1951. And just recently, Derek, if I could brag here a little bit, and listen, I'm proud of this. I'm not a guy that's going to hide stuff that I'm really proud of. I was just inducted into their Hall of Fame this past September, in the Rocky Mountain College Hall of Fame. Yeah, so... then I went to Western Oregon, had nationally ranked teams there. That was the top assistant at Washington State with Kelvin Sampson for 2 years. And then I ended up going to Central Connecticut as head coach there. It was a brand new Division I program, spent 5 years there. We led the country in block shots my final 2 years there. Then a new AD, new president got fired, and there's two kinds of coaches, those who have been fired and those who are going to be, and I've been in both of those fraternities. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah. And then that's the reality of it. I mean, it is what it is. But I guess going back to what you said about Rocky Mountain, congratulations. I'm going to go back and I'll correct myself. Hall of Famer Mark Adams.
That sounds pretty good too, by the way. And it was really funny. So Homer Drew, who's a good friend of mine, obviously the former head coach of Valpo, and he just got inducted into the College Basketball Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And he's so humble, he didn't even tell his family.
Yeah.
Whereas me, I was screaming to everyone that, hey, I'm in the Hall of Fame, So two different personalities, but a man that I love, I respect, and very, very deserving for Homer. He was the only coach that I ever lost to, and actually he made me feel good about it. That's how persuasive he is. He's a wonderful gentleman.
Yeah. So I'm curious because I feel that now that I work at a school district, and I've sort of gotten to know a lot of our high school coaches, and it seems that the one thing that they most value, especially once it becomes time where those kids become seniors, it's time for them to graduate, it's relationships. I've seen several of our coaches that go to where their kids go to college, and they go and watch their games, all throughout their college career, because they want to maintain those relationships. When they're seniors, they're trying to help them figure out what they want to do. If it's, going into the service, armed forces, going to whatever college they want to help them get recruited. It really is relationship driven. I'm curious from your perspective, what did you pull away from your coaching career? Was it the relationships? What was one of those lessons that you really took away and still hold true to this day that you don't sort of forget, that you sort of learned from being a coach?
Well, Derek, you hit it right on the head, and let me share with you a quick story, and then again, how it comes full circle. So I'm a 25-year-old head coach at Rocky Mountain College. I inherited a team that had won 3 games the previous year. We won 11 games, and during that time, I inserted a young man who was 5'9", had decent quickness, hard for him to stay up on the defensive end, but could really shoot it. Great kid. His name was Jim Clark. And Jim played for me, and as soon as I inserted him into the starting lineup, we basically became a 500 basketball team over the second half of the season. He brought leadership and chemistry and the ability to make some big shots as well. At the end of his senior year, because he was a senior, so I only had him for 1 season. At the end of his senior year, he came into my office and said, "Coach, I'm going to apply for law school at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. I was wondering if you would send a letter of recommendation." I said, "Jim, gosh, I'd be honored to." And I sent Willamette a letter of recommendation on Jim. And a couple of weeks later, Rocky Mountain is a small little campus, beautiful campus in Billings, Montana. And I left my office and I was walking to the administration building, which is like about halfway across campus. All of a sudden I hear somebody screaming, Coach Adams." And I turn around. That's how small the campus is, by the way. And I turn around, and here's Jim Clark. And he's running down the sidewalk with a piece of paper in his hand. And I hope I don't get emotional telling this story because I think of it often. And Jim runs up to me, hands me the letter, and it's his acceptance letter to Willamette University in law school. Today, Jim Clark is a successful attorney in Seattle, Washington. He's got a beautiful daughter, Alexa, who actually had a horrible horse accident. A horse kicked her in the head. She's doing great now. She's going to the University of Montana. And Jim and I we're best of friends. And the only reason I'm in the Hall of Fame at Rocky Mountain College is because Jim Clark rallied all my former players who sent letters on my behalf to get me into the Hall of Fame. He's the best friend I could ever have on the planet. That's just one guy.
Yeah.
Just one guy, and that's the value of coaching. And today, for example, I mentioned I coach 15U baseball. My son Robbie plays on a 15U baseball team here in Middletown, Ohio. And there's one young man in particular who has had just unbelievable experiences. I won't get into it, but it's been publicly documented. You probably could look it up if you wanted to, I suppose, where he's just gone through a lot. And he's a really good kid. Everything's yes or no, sir. And, I found out he plays football. So I said, send me your schedule. And so I went and watched him play football. Now, I'm not telling you this for me. I enjoy it. It's a way for me to connect with a 15-year-old young man who maybe hasn't had all the breaks in life and had as good a life as what I've had or my sons have had. And that's what makes it special. When that young man comes up and says, "Hey, Coach, thanks for coming to my football game." That's all I need. I mean, and that's the kind of relationships you build as a coach that I'll never forget.
Yeah. Yeah, those stories there have to leave a lasting impact to let you know the effect you had. Because I think the one thing that people forget is while it is sports at all levels, and you're taking out the professional level because we know at that point it's a whole different ball game with it being more of a business and things like that. But when you're educating young men and women, the college and high school level, it's more about developing young men and women to be good citizens, be, outstanding people. And because not everyone's going to go to play professional sports. Like we all know the statistics about that, but that's got to be a pretty nice sense of accomplishments when you can know that, these folks are moving on to do something pretty special. So that's a great story. So I'm curious now, you transition. What led you into becoming a college basketball analyst? Did you have did you want to be, doing play-by-play or analyst work for ESPN? Like, when did you sort of feel that sort of thing come on?
Derek, when I was a kid, again, I kind of go back to my dad, whenever there was an opportunity for me to stand up in front of a group and speak, he would push me out into that opportunity. And so I always felt comfortable communicating with adults, even at a really young age. I mean, we're talking about 8, 9 years old that I would do presentations in front of adults and different things. And
really?
And so, yeah, when I got into coaching, it's pretty natural. I mean, I like doing interviews and things like that. I think I was a pretty media friendly coach. I mean, I wasn't Barry Hinson, but I was pretty good,
Yeah.
And so along the way, I got some chances to do some halftime stuff for the Boston Celtics when I was at Central Connecticut. I worked with a guy by the name of Beasley Reese. Beasley played for the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys, and he worked at the NBC affiliate up in Hartford and would have me on some Sundays to do some analysis. So I get fired from Central Connecticut, and of course, Central Connecticut, I lived in Southington, which is real close to Bristol, and I had some friends that worked at ESPN, and so one of my friends set up a kind of an interview with a guy. I won't say who it was. He's actually still there. And I took this tape with me. This was right after I was fired because I was looking to see if maybe I could do something different in broadcasting. And Derek, he told me point blank, I had no shot. No shot. So I left that office saying, I think he's wrong. Now, this is like a top guy at ESPN, okay, today and then. And so I left that office. I thought, no, he's wrong. So I come back to Ohio. I stayed away from basketball for a year because I was building my own business as a sales representative for a manufacturing company. I wanted to learn everything I could about business. Well, after a year of that, there was a friend of mine, became a friend of mine, Larry Hansgen, was program director at WHIO Radio here in Dayton, Ohio. And of course, the Dayton Flyers, basketball is a religion. It's a passion. It's a fanaticism. And so he came down and wanted to meet with me because Oliver Purnell at that time was the head coach of Dayton and knew I was in town, and they had this post-game call and radio show called Flyer Feedback.
Okay.
And Larry felt like it wasn't very good. So he asked me if I would host this Flyer Feedback show. Okay. And this is what he says to me, Derek. He goes, now, do you want to host like another guy with you? Or do you want to do it by yourself? I said, no, I just do it by myself. And I had no idea what I was saying. No idea. And so I end up, the first game I did was Wally Szczerbiak, played for Miami of Ohio, played in the NBA for many years. Now you see him on CBS. And he drops 43 on the Flyers. They win in the Dayton Decibel Dungeon, the UD Arena, and I got to go do this show. And I'm in a studio then. Eventually, I did in front of a bunch of drunk Catholics in a bar in Dayton, Ohio, which was a lot of fun, by the way. And I'm Catholic too, by the way. So I go to the studio, and the producer's counting off 5, 4, 3, and I'm sitting there thinking, I am screwed. I have no idea what I'm doing. There's no host. I'm going to die on the show. So all I could think of, Derek, was to reach to the microphone, grab these folks by the throat, and bring them in with me. So I opened up the show way over the top, and I said, I don't want a bunch of old guys sitting in their den drinking beer and complaining about the coach. Don't even call me. I don't want to talk to you. I want a female Flyer fanatic to call me right now. Well, I'm at my desk right now, and I'm looking at her. Her name's Rita Weisenbach. She was 81 years old at the time. She became my first caller for every show for the 10 years that I hosted that show.
Wow.
And when ESPN called me about possibly going on, because then I graduated to local TV and regional TV and the A10 network and stuff like that, but I got a call one day from Dan Steers, the coordinating producer for college basketball at ESPN at that time, and he proceeds to tell me that he listened to my radio show on the way out of town one time, and he never forgot it. Thought it was the best post-game call-in show he ever heard, and he referenced Rita. Now, Rita called me one game when she had gone to Dayton Heart Hospital for a heart attack, and still called me as my first caller that night.
Wow.
Rita passed away 12 years ago. She was 91 years old, and her family asked me to do her eulogy. That's how close we became a de facto grandmother to my kids. And, you know, Derek, the rest is history. If it wasn't for Rita Weisenbach, I don't think I'd be on ESPN for 21 years. That's how it worked.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So pretty much Flyer Feedback, a post-game radio call-in show, parlays into you now becoming a national college basketball analyst now at ESPN since, did I read that right, 1999 or 2000?
Yeah. This is my 21st year on ESPN. Can you believe that? 21st year.
That's crazy.
Amazing run.
That's crazy. Yep. So let's fast forward here now as we're going through the timeline. I start working at the Missouri Valley in 2010, and folks that listened to this podcast before know my background. I've had a couple Missouri State folks on. We've talked Missouri State basketball in some episodes, so everyone knows I'm an alum. I followed the Valley. I've been going to Arch Madness every year since about 1998 or 99. Haven't missed one since, and I hope still plan not to miss one, even though I don't have to work there, but I can just be a fan. And watching Valley basketball has always been sort of a great thing because they've always had great TV coverage for a league of that size, a non-BCS league. It's like one of those great things. And there's a lot of pride in the fans, not just, you know, Missouri State, but across the entire league, in teams that have come and gone and too. So, you become part of that TV family as well. And as part of a pretty unique time, as we mentioned at the start of the podcast, 2013, let's just fast forward to that, becomes a very special year because Wichita State goes to the Final Four. But those years around that still, I mean, years even prior to that, 2006, with you know, 4 teams in the NCAA tournament. 2007, they had sold out the Scott Trade Center, the Savage Center at the time, for Arch Madness semifinals. It goes on and on, the great history of the league. This year, they're going to be celebrating the 30th anniversary of Arch Madness. But it's not often that, you know, a league that size sends a team to the Final Four, regardless of who it is. But the Valley's always been one of those leagues that's been resilient, that has all of its members sort of step up to the plate. And for a stretch, there was a year, I think from about 97 or 98 all the way through, you know, 2008 or 9, every team in the league had at least one NCAA appearance. My beloved Missouri State Bears hadn't been there since 99. But still, if you go from that range there, every team in the league had at least one appearance, which is sort of crazy. You don't think about that until you sort of look at it on paper. But the history is just fantastic. You got to be a part of that. And I'm thinking back to one of the specific years of when both Northern Iowa and Wichita State were both ranked in the top 25. We had a lot of fun that year. Even doing I think we did like a 25, 30-minute YouTube feature because when you got 2 teams ranked in the top 25, it's a pretty special year, obviously. But to some of those players really setting themselves apart. And I'm going a long, long way to get your thoughts on something. So before we jumped on recording, I wrote down what I thought would be my starting 5 from my era of working at the Valley.
Wow.
Now, I tried to put as much thought as this as I could, but 5 names just stood out immediately that I thought, I might not have everything I need. I may not have size or something, but man, these are some 5 really talented players that I really enjoyed watching, and I appreciated what they did for the Valley. So I want you to react to these 5 names for me. Doug McDermott. DJ Ballantyne. Kyle Weems. Fred VanVleet, Ron Baker.
Yeah. I mean,
and I'm forgetting, there's a lot of players. I mean, there's a lot of fantastic guys that have won, that were Player of the Year award winners.
Yeah, Jake Odom at Indiana State would be another one that goes to the top of the list for sure. Kyle Weems, a great story on Kyle Weems. I think I kind of came into my own at Missouri State as the voice of the Valley when Wichita State, this was the 2011 end of the regular season, if I'm not mistaken.
I know where you're going.
And it was at Missouri State, and Missouri State has a chance to win the Valley Championship regular season for the first time ever. And Cuonzo Martin, of course, was the head coach there, and Kyle Weems was, just a tremendous player and a great young man. And Derek, I don't know if you remember this or not, but at that time, Cuonzo's story about having cancer when he played over in Italy and coming back home was not a well-known story.
Correct.
I'm not sure anybody really knew about that very much at that time. And, we got down to the end of that broadcast, and I held that story until the end. And I kind of want to, if we got a few minutes, I want to get into this because I think this is interesting. This is kind of when I arrived. Now, I've been in the Valley now for 3 or 4 years, but I think this is when I arrived, like I said, it's kind of the voice of the Valley. And one thing I always do is I try to sit down with coaches and get to know them on a personal level. And Cuonzo, late in the season, he was exhausted. And he shared with me, and every coach goes through this, by the way, he shared with me that there were some doubts about if he was really being the father and husband that he really wanted to be because of the grind of the season. And I have this discussion with a lot of different guys, and Cuonzo's a great father, great husband, by the way. But you get concerned about that. So I told Cuonzo, this was on Friday before the Saturday afternoon tip-off. I told Cuonzo, I said, look, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home, tuck your kid in. I said, how old is he? And he was like 15 years old. And I said, I want you to tuck him in and kiss him on the forehead and tell you love him tonight. And then I want you to give your wife a hug and tell her how much you love her. And then, Cuonzo, you got to make me a promise. So I have a feeling you're going to win tomorrow. And they're playing a good Wichita State team. Greg was really starting to get it going, but not quite what they were the next couple of years. And I said, I have a feeling you're going to win. I said, here's the deal. I'm going to be there in front of the table here, and there's a good chance I'll interview you in the post-game celebration. But Cuonzo, take your time. Promise me you'll take some time to enjoy the moment before you come and see me. Well, sure enough, we're coming down the stretch, and I knew he had shared with me about his struggles with cancer, and I saved that story to the end. Now, ESPN tells you to use your best story over and over again. I didn't do that, Derek. I saved the story. I thought it was so impactful because if this game was close, you literally double your audience in the last minute, double your audience in the last 30 seconds with the close game. So I waited to the last 10 seconds, and then I told the story of Cuonzo Martin, of how he had battled back from cancer. And, of course, they win the game, pandemonium in Springfield. And I'm standing there waiting, and I have the producer in my ear. They storm the floor. It's just nuts. And I hear my producer, Greg Logan, very talented guy, say, Mark, where's Cuonzo? And I said, don't worry, he'll be here. And then another 2 minutes later, Mark, where's Cuonzo? Don't worry, he'll be here. And sure enough, Cuonzo comes by, and we did the post-game interview, and I reminded him of a story about cancer. It was very, very emotional. And I'll never forget that moment, Derek. I'll never forget that moment because that was when the Valley was ramping up to its zenith of importance in college basketball since the 1960s of the old Cincinnati National Championship teams. And all the great memories of DJ Ballantyne, one of the most wonderful people you'll ever meet in your life from Evansville. Seth Tuttle, another guy that's not on your list, from Northern Iowa. Another wonderful person. Jake Odom, Doug McDermott, Kyle Weems, and then Fred VanVleet and Ron Baker. Two guys today that are still friends of mine. I admire all of these guys and have stayed in touch, by the way, with all of them over the years. And it just was such an honor to watch them, to be a part of Doug McDermott's 41-point performance to beat Wichita State in Omaha in what we all thought was the last game of his career as a junior, but then comes back and plays as a senior in the Big East. To be there for the undefeated regular season with Takale Cotton, with Ron Baker, with Fred VanVleet, with Evan Wessel, the human Labrador retriever on loose balls. I mean, and watch my son Robbie, actually, when they won the Valley Championship, I think it was in 2014, 2016, excuse me, Ron and Fred's last year, Greg Marshall invited my son Robbie to be in their team picture because he knew of my affection for the Missouri Valley Conference. I'd grown up as a fan. Greatest memories of my life. And I'm so grateful to have been part of the Missouri Valley Conference for all those years.
Yeah, pretty special time. I definitely remember the 2011 Missouri State Wichita State. I was actually on headset as well at the table with you, if you remember. I was doing official stats actually for that game.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely remember the pandemonium of that, and definitely a pretty special year. So, it's funny because the way the college basketball landscape is now, transitions happen. We've had realignment. We've had things happen, different players, different rules. I mean, all kinds of different things happening with the game. And you yourself, get the opportunity. You go on and work now in the American Athletic Conference, doing games there. I'm curious because it's still college basketball. Different teams. You're seeing Wichita State still, along with their move to that league. But I'll admit it's not a league that I get to see a whole lot of. I think just based on when they're on and what I'm paying attention to, you just don't a whole lot. But I'm curious to get just your feedback on the landscape as a whole, because I feel like now, with the game now, with different rules, 3-point line moving, a flopping rule, and just the game itself, not any other. I know there are other issues I want to definitely get your opinion on too, but the game itself, where do you see it's headed? Do you see it maintaining? Is it becoming a little bit more of a jumbled mess? Is it losing any of its quote unquote purity, if that makes any sense? Just sort of curious to get your thoughts on the game, the landscape of college basketball as it is today.
Well, we're in an era of rapid changing landscape. And listen, the name purity, the word purity in college basketball simply just don't go hand in hand anymore. And, we all know that. We don't accept it, but we all know it. I think we're on the verge of secession from the union. I think that the NCAA and the way that it has managed itself over the course of time, the only thing that's saving it is money. And that's the only thing that's saving the NCAA because of the contracts that they have with the networks and the amount of money that comes in from the NCAA tournament. But let's face facts here. There are 90 teams in college basketball out of the 351 that spend $5 million or more on their men's basketball program. And to me, that is the line of demarcation. And listen, I'm a capitalist, so I'm okay with the spending of money. But the fact now that we're really going to go to a semi-professional type of model, I think that the answer lies in a really new alignment of teams like that are willing to be a part of that arms race. And again, I'm a capitalist. I'm not speaking negatively about this. I get it. I'm a businessman. I understand the value of money and how college basketball has grown. But I really think that in the best interest of the programs who really want to spend at that level to be relevant, they need their own national entity to drive that boat. The NCAA, in my view, is incapable of changing that big battleship and turning it that far in that direction in the span of time where I think these changes are going to take place. Is there a place for an NCAA-like organization that still has that and I'll use this term loosely because I don't think it applies to the NCAA anymore, but is there an organization that wants that purity, and are there schools that want that purity? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I think that's where the divide will come. Those that want to be money-driven and pay their players, and again, there's nothing wrong with that, versus schools that really want to focus on the educational upbringing of their student athletes with a balance between the money and the off-court and the on-court participation. I think that's coming. It's been coming for a long time, and you know me. I've said that for a long time, that it is on the way, and now it's on steroids now. I think with all the different states and different regulations, now the NCAA is going to have to change. As far as on the floor goes, the biggest, I think, constructive, critical comment that I have about how the game has changed and how it's officiated is that we continue to try to legislate common sense. And I've never seen an organization that could effectively do that. And like the flopping rule, to me, just play on.
Yeah.
If a kid's a flopper, you play on. I don't get all this other stuff. The old elbow rule that we had that's long since passed, that was a crazy rule about 5 or 6 years ago, when any time there was contact, it was like a flagrant foul. Well, there's some basketball plays, and it's been amended, but I believe the officials have common sense, Derek, and I think they need to call the game based on common sense, not based upon some policymaker that thinks a new rule is going to fix everything. To me, that's not the way the world works.
Yeah. And hopefully they can get all that figured out just for the good of the game. Like you said, sometimes these rules come and go, but I get it. They want to do good, but sometimes it's like, we're overthinking it here. Like you said it best. Common sense. Like, I get it, and we can figure this out. So hopefully it goes that way.
And officials hate it too, by the way. I talk to officials all the time, and they just want to call the game. They want to use their common sense and their judgment. Yeah. That's what the game was predicated upon once upon a time. Common sense and judgment. Right. But they're trying to legislate everybody to be out of the same cookie cutter mold. And that's just not, I don't think that's good for the game. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. I think the one takeaway for me from my time working at the Valley is that I sort of have a different look on all of college athletics. But when it comes to the officials, I really sort of cringe when I see people on Twitter, criticizing officials kind of thing, because I know I wouldn't want to be in that position. I wouldn't want to be a coach. Like it's just sort of like when you're close to it and you're not there, but you're seeing what they go through, you get a different perspective kind of on it. And I think that's where I am. And I get it. It's tough, but it's sort of like they've been put in a weird position with some of the rules. It's kind of like, what do? They got to call the rule, enforce the rule, but at the same time, it's sort of like they're also put in an awkward position with it. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with it. It's the first year for the flopping. I know that's one of the big ones out there that people are talking about, and it's happened to Missouri State. The Missouri State Xavier game, late in the game. I don't want to know if it. I don't want to know if it cost Missouri State the game, but it definitely played a role in the outcome down the stretch. So, but we'll see if they can get it figured out, and let's see how the season plays out. So, one thing I wanted to ask about too. So, you've talked with some conferences, some non-BCS sort of middle tier conference, I guess I'll call them, about scheduling. And they've enacted some things to sort of in their conference schedule portion of it, especially late in the season, to sort of, I guess, flex their scheduling so that top tier teams play against each other to sort of help them out. Now, the RPI sort of gone by the wayside, and we've got new metrics in place. But I'm curious, sort of, how'd you come up with the science behind, thinking this through? Because now we've got the leagues that are now officially playing 20 conference games or more that are going in that direction. So leagues like the Valley, it'll be tougher to find those non-conference games against BCS leagues. What's been the thought process out there on the landscape from some of the other leagues about how they sort of flex their scheduling late in the year so that their upper tier teams, quote unquote, are playing each other once more instead of playing a team that could sort of drag down their strength of schedule or the old RPI metric kind of thing?
Well, let's first talk about what the goal is and why. The goal is to play as many NCAA net enhanced ranking games as you possibly can. And if you can't get those in the non-conference schedule, because all of the big budget conferences are basically going to 20 game schedules, unless they only have 10 teams, then they're staying probably at 18. But the other 4 big budget leagues are all going to 20 game schedules. So think about that. There's probably 60 teams or so in those 4 conferences, and that's 120 games. Non-conference just go away. That won't play a Missouri Valley team, even at the home floor of that big budget team. So the problem is, how do you get metrics enhanced games against other opponents when you don't have access to those 120 games? So that's the problem. So what I did was I looked at that problem and anticipated that problem in moving forward, and was invited down to Conference USA by Kermit Davis at the time from Middle Tennessee State. And I had done all this research for the last 10 years on all the different budget teams, how many games they were playing at home. And just to give you a real quick number, over the last 10 years or so, the big budget conferences, so all the product names of the Atlantic the Atlantic Coast Conference, the Big 10, the Big 12, the Big East, the Pac-12 now, and the SEC, they play collectively their non-conference schedule, Derek. They play collectively over 85% of their non-conference games at home or neutral site. Now think about that.
Yeah.
Okay. And whereas conferences like the Valley, they might play 55 or 60% of their non-conference games at home or on a neutral site. That's a big difference, isn't it? So what I did is I looked at the problem and then said, okay, how can we create metrically enhanced games within your own conference schedule and be creative about it? And came up with a concept that you play enough of a sample size of games. In Conference USA, it was 14 games. And then literally Conference USA in mid-February, they stop. And then they play 4 more games, and what we decide to do is split the conference into 3 different pods, if you will. The top 5 teams from those 14 games are all going to play against each other coming down the stretch. They play 4 more games. 5 teams, they play each other, 4 more games. There's a middle pod of 5 teams. There's a bottom pod of 4 teams. And the reason we segregated that was really simple, was because, I'll give you a specific example. In the Sun Belt, I was doing a game 2 years ago when Louisiana Lafayette was number 31 in the RPI. And that's when the RPI was being used. It wasn't the net yet. And they lose at home to Little Rock, who was like number 327 in the RPI. And this was like their last regular season game. They had just clinched the Sun Belt Championship, had a chance for an at-large bid. All they got to do is basically win out, get to the championship game in the Sun Belt, and they're probably going to be like a mid-20s RPI team and have a chance for an at-large bid if they lose in the championship game. Well, they lose to Little Rock. They drop literally from 31 in the RPI to 65 overnight. This happens all the time, Derek. It's stupid. And that's exactly what I told administrators and presidents. I said, what are you doing? Why are you having your best teams play the worst teams in your conference coming down the stretch? Even if they win that game, their RPI is going to drop. So why don't we think different about this? And Conference USA instituted that plan last year. Now, they didn't have anybody good enough really for it to make a difference because their best net team was right around 100, okay? So you're not getting it either way on that. But they improved their metrics across the board in the top grouping of 5 teams. I mean, they improved their net ranking on average by about 8 spots per team for all 5 teams. It's pretty incredible. So that's what I did. It's the right way to go. And I would even enhance it further, Derek, of not only getting those games for your final 4, 5, 6 games within your conference where you literally pit your best teams against each other, but I would also go cross-conference with that. I would set up bracket buster-like games, the last game of the regular season, where the better teams in the Valley would be playing against the better teams in the Atlantic 10 and the Mountain West and Conference USA in the Southern Conference, that type of thing, where you'd have that preset where your number 1 teams, your number 2 teams are all going to play in that last weekend against each other, because that brings tremendous metric value and it forces the selection committee to watch your best teams play. Yeah. And whenever you can set up better matchups late in the season, when the committee is actually meeting in Indianapolis, it makes a huge difference in how they view your program.
Yeah. And a situation like that, I can imagine being a lot more fan friendly as well. Teams, something like the Bracket Busters existing, drawing more interest to see what happens down the stretch. So, we'll see. We'll see. I know there are extenuating circumstances of why things may or may not happen, but we can always dream.
Oh, tell me about that. Listen, you and I both know the politics, and listen, I'm going to call a spade here. Coaches control their schedules, and while coaches talk a good game on how they want to create a competitive schedule, no, they don't. No, they don't. Not in non-conference play. There's a few of them that do. I'll get Steve Forbes at East Tennessee State. He'll play anybody, anywhere, anytime. He gets it. But the large majority of coaches, they schedule to keep their jobs, not to enhance their resume. That's a fact.
Well, sir, I really appreciate the time. Before I let you go, I got to get your thoughts. The college basketball season thus far, we've already had Evansville go to Kentucky and take down number 1 on their home floor.
Yeah.
Just last night, we've also now had Stephen F. Austin go to number 1 and beat Duke on their home floor. Is this college basketball season shaping up to be one of the more unpredictable ones? Do you see anybody separating themselves away from the pack? I mean, you tweeted it yourself. Your do more with less report, the Stephen F. Austin win over Duke. I believe you tweeted that was the largest gap. I don't remember the dollar figure. I can put your Twitter account. Okay, here we go. Stephen F. Austin's budget, $1.8 million. Duke's budget, $20.1. The biggest gap, $18.3 million in budget between those two teams. The larger with the lesser budget team winning ever since you've been tracking the do more with less report. I mean,
yeah.
I thought this Missouri State was picked to win the Valley. They started out slow. They're trying to get things going in the right direction. I think Dana Ford's been a tremendous asset to the program, and they've got lots of great pieces there. But they got to figure it out. And I think being a realist, no one really knows how many bids. We can look at bracketology and all that stuff, which personally I think looking at that in November and December is kind of ridiculous. You just don't know. Let's see how the non-conference plays out. But, I mean, in reality, things can change for any team with 3 or 4 days in March in their conference tournament, and it just completely turns around. But I don't know, anybody that you're sort of paying any more closer attention to that folks may not be tracking on that could make some noise that we've seen so far show that they've got what it takes?
Dayton Flyers.
Really?
Dayton Flyers are really, really good. Yeah. They've got a kid named Obi Toppin who kind of grew late bloomer. He's a sophomore now, was not even invited to the NBA combines last year to be evaluated. Not even invited. He might be the best player in the country. I mean, it's been a meteoric rise for him. And for Dayton Flyer fans, I mean, Donnie May back in the 60s was the best all-around player at 6'5" or better that played for the Dayton Flyers. This kid deserves a mention right now as being potentially the next Donnie May. That's how good this guy is. Dayton would be a team that now, they're in the Maui Classic. People are starting to figure it out. But, boy, they are absolutely loaded. And then you look at, Stephen F. Austin last night, as you mentioned, an $18.3 million divide between the budget of Stephen F. Austin, $1.8 million, versus the budget of Duke, $20.1 million. And they go on the road and win. I mean, Evansville's a $3 million program. They go and beat basically a $16 to $18 million program, depending on the year, with Kentucky. Those are unbelievable budget divides, of teams that are going on the road and winning, which, Derek, for you and me, it makes it a hell of a lot of fun, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's what we live for.
Yes.
And as far as the Americans concerned, I mean, Memphis is loaded. Once James Wiseman gets eligible after that fiasco, I mean, he's as good as anybody in the country as well, and they are supremely talented, but very, very young. I mean, that's a team to keep your eye on in the American. So while the power conferences still are going to, wield that big stick, there are a lot of other teams and a lot of other conferences that are really, really good. I'll tell you, I mentioned Steve Forbes. I think East Tennessee State's really good, too, out of the Southern. Remember how good Wofford was a year ago?
Mm-hmm.
And how about Mike Young going from Wofford to Virginia Tech? Look at the job he's done with Landers Nolley, who's a freshman and is as good a freshman as there is in the country. Everybody's talking about Cole Anthony, and for good reason. But Landers Nolley, if you're a jump shooter and you come off screens and you know how to score, Mike Young might be the best in the country to play for. And he's showing that now at Virginia Tech. Yeah. Really interesting college basketball season. A lot to be excited about. And I've got Temple coming up that's also undefeated. I got them against Missouri coming up and against St. Joe's. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of really interesting and good teams around the country that I can't wait to see in person.
Well, we can't wait to hear from you too, sir, as you call those games. I encourage folks. I'll put it this way. I've always sort of gauged what's happening. I'm an avid Twitter user, as folks know, and sometimes I just plop down and I hop on Twitter and see what the majority of folks are watching, and I turn that game on. So that's sort of what I sort of bounce back and forth, but I'll find something that I've got more interest in, obviously, and sort of lock in on that. But excited to hear you, sir, call some more games and be looking out for you on ESPN, calling the American and who knows what else. But hey, it's November, it's feast week, and as soon as we get through with college football, college basketball will have all the attention after the start of the year and conference play, and it'll be onward to March for the fun, where the fun really gets amped up. So it'll be a fun ride to get to another college basketball season, and hopefully it's just an enjoyable time for us all.
Thanks, Derek. Always great to work with you. Great to reconnect today, and all my best to you and your future endeavors. You're the best.
I appreciate your time, sir. Thanks again, and let's not wait too long to reconnect. I hope you have a great season, and I really appreciate you taking out the time.